Yes, welcome again on behalf of Ismeta. We are delighted to have with us today Jamie McHugh, Master Somatic Movement Educator and Therapist, pioneer and creator of Somatic Expression, Body Wisdom for Modern Minds. Jamie has generously offered to curate, organize, and share with the somatic movement community a podcast series. The first one happened and is recorded on the Ismeta website. Episode 1 can be found there in a variety of places under the special events page, as well as in the member forum for Ismeta members under the Ecosomatics thread that he created so beautifully. So today we're delighted to have Jamie here facilitating episode 2, a conversation about ecosomatics in the Anthropocene. Earth matters. Jamie, thank you so much for being here today and all of your generous contributions to our profession.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So, dealing with all these technical snafus, let's all take a collective moment to just enjoy our breath and settle into our own personal ecosystem. So, welcome everybody, and thank you for showing up. I know it's a gesture of your caring to bring your attention to this forum. And for me, just knowing that right now there are 33 people, human beings in this room together, sharing a common yearning and intention for resources, conversation, potential actions around climate change is very heartening to me. And I, of course, want to open it up to be larger than climate change. I would basically saying the preservation of life on Earth in all of its many facets. So, very quickly, last episode, my guest, Satu, and I know I'm going to butcher her last name because it's Finnish, Palankangas, I think, and one of these days I'll learn it for sure, who's based in Finland, and Martha Eddy, who's based in New York. And Satu, one of the main threads for me that came out of Satu's conversation is this idea of staying with. That she started this ecosomatics class in the theater school in Finland over 10 years ago and just kept bringing it forward, and now it is actually part of the curriculum at the theater school, which I think is awesome. So just that feeling of I'm going to advocate for this and I'm going to see it through, and there it is. It's landed. And Martha, on the other hand, really talked about this spark of inspiration that instigated global water dances. How first came from a student who she found out was doing a project of moving around to different environments, bringing awareness to the pollution in the local bodies of water, and basically rode a horse across the United States to bring attention. So once again, a very far-reaching project that one individual started, but of course trickled out into inspiring other people. And so Martha, when she was at Schumacher College, with other people, began to devise and work with this idea of global water dances based on Rudolf Laban's movement choirs. So, how to start with something small and just see where the process leads. And since you all here are dancers, movement people, as you all know, once you take a step, and then another step, and another step, momentum begins to happen. Movement becomes effortless. But as we all know, how do we walk through that portal and begin taking action? Because as we all know, as Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen talks in her book, it's titled Sensing, Feeling, and Action. So we can sense and feel a lot, but how do we bring ourselves into action, particularly into action related to preservation of life on the earth? So my guest today, I'm very excited because when Elizabeth asked me to create this Ecosomatics forum in the spring, my research mind said, okay, so who's doing ecosomatics out there? How are people defining it? I mean, I have my own definitions, but I'm sure other people have their definitions. And so Walla, boom, appeared, as one of my first kind of search finds. And I was very excited as I'm reading through what she had written, like, far out. I love this. This is spot on because she's covering so much territory. Now, I'd heard of Nala over the years. We were both in Martin Keogh's book, Hope Beneath Our Feet, that was published, I think it was, 10 years ago or something. I forget. But I've always heard her name. And so reading through, I was very excited because as she wrote what I would call a manifesto. And so I'm just going to before I kind of get into just the wonderful wordsmith that she is, I just want to say welcome to Nala, and just that you've been a source of inspiration for me in how you've lived your life and how you're applying your ideals into action. So, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
It's a pleasure. We had a great, far-reaching conversation before we talked, and of course we can, I think, talk for hours. But I want to kind of just focus in on a few basic ideas. But I want this to first of all just wash over you some of what she wrote 20 years ago. This word flow of ecosomatics is. Ecosomatics is fun. Ecosomatics is a soft technology. Ecosomatics is a gateway to connection with the universal. Ecosomatics is a way to bring movement practice outdoors. Ecosomatics is a challenge to the notion that the arts are a luxury. Ecosomatics is a demonstration of the indispensability of the moving arts to everyday life. Ecosomatics is at play in the landscape. And that essentially our philosophy at the Bee Collective is that earthwork is a sacred activity. Work in the landscape can help us make our bodies and social skills strong where they were once atrophied as we simultaneously embody our ideas of health and abundance. We believe that the tools of the embodied arts, which originated in the context of the village, do not only belong in the halls of academia or among quote-unquote professionals in theater or dance. They are destined to return to the folk, where they can be put to use on an everyday basis in service of massive grassroots change in our communities and gardens. So I imagine you can feel that inspiration in my own soma from those words that really just brought me alive. And I just so want to kind of say, as I read back your language to you, how is it in this moment, and just any reflections you have on those kind of source materials and what I'd call the evolution of your action and thinking.
Well, certainly when you read those back, which is not something I've ever experienced before, someone reading words that I spoke 20 years ago or 15, 20 years ago, I started getting teary-eyed. Yeah, because they're just as true now as they were then, and maybe more so. The need for these technologies, the soft technologies, to spread virally and kind of come down from their tower and just settle into the general folk wisdom. And I'm not sure how I came about those words, but I think of it a little bit differently now, because rather than giving the somatic arts back to the people as a charity, it's just a recognition of where they originated in the first place. They originated from the land and the creatures of the land, and from the necessary and beautiful work of earning and being involved with the sustenance of raising food and raising children and building homes and weaving our clothing and needing to get along. People needing to get along while we do all these things. So the songs of the land and the movements of the land coming up into our bodies and being expressed by us in order that we keep the gears of our social landscape lubricated. Or the weave of our social landscape strong and tight. So it's not like something that was a mental concept that academics brought up and now let's give it to the people because we're so we're so generous and kind. It comes from there in the first place. It comes from the land and all the bird song and the tree people and the rocks and the winds. So I have a little bit, perhaps more of a, it's even more humbled of a definition now than I did then.
So beautiful. As you're speaking, a lot of different images going through my mind, and one of the things I was struck by, and also something in your writing, is about bringing these practices outdoors, taking them out of the sanctified studios into direct engagement with the environment. And I was thinking back many years ago at Sea Ranch at the beach. I had done the developmental movement progression with Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen in the early 90s, and it just wasn't happening for me. And I think part of it was, as an adult human, feeling that movement on my knees on a hardwood floor. And it wasn't until I then did the patterns at the beach in sand with the sound of the ocean and that sense of space, and the just really dropping down into the comfort of being held in that way, that then the mind of the movement actually propelled me into action. It's like, oh, this is kind of the choreography, but underneath it is that sensate experience of being held by the earth. And so this idea of how can we have the sanctified space of the studio as a container, but then how do we then bring these experiences out into relationship with the land?
Yeah. Well, I remember at one point living in Seattle, and I had just gotten back from a long journey up the Inside Passage on a boat, sailing on a small boat, and was doing a lot of exploration. Yeah, all kinds of paratheatrical, somatic experiments, and living on small islands, and really feeling the way that movement came up into my feet and then rose up through me from the earth. And when I landed back in the city and started performing and doing a lot of different studying with teachers, including, down in the Bay Area, working with a lot of somatics for social change, actually with Martha Eddy and Carol Swan. And I could not be in the city anymore.
Mm.
And I knew that would probably be like the death of my career in the arts, as far as, not having a bunch of people to collaborate with, or, stages to perform on. But the pull for me to really live on the land was so strong, because the blare of the sound of the city and just the lights and the pace, I needed to experience myself as being held by the body of the earth. And I ended up getting a small piece of land, which I'm there right now. I'm still here. And just wrapping myself around a maple tree and weeping. I mean, I probably wept for weeks when I first landed here, and it was a formative experience for the path I'm on now, which involves a lot of, grief and praise, and working with ancestors, and working with and when I say ancestors, I mean not just our human ancestors and our human kin, but also the trees and the rocks and the winds and the waters. So I had to give a break, or give up my notions of what being an artist was, or what being a somatic practitioner was in an urban context, and really start offering my dance to the trees, and this is a practice I still do, is to go out into, say, a beach or a forest, and often I will bring offerings if I have remembered, but sometimes I don't have a little stone or anything that I've brought to give, and I say, well, here's my song, here's my dance. And feeling that interaction, and the gratitude of the forest for that offering is, it's not something that our modern society, encourages, or even conceives of as something worthy to do.
Right. And it's interesting that you are talking about that, because the other day I was listening to a podcast by a man named Josh Shree, and he kept coming back over and over to this theme of animism is normative consciousness. That for modernity, or you could even say just the last 2,000 years, is such a small sliver of human experience. And if you look back in time, even in Tibet, it was originally an animist culture before Tibetan Buddhism evolved. And so our foundations as human beings is in that sense of connection with our environment. And that consciousness, if you think about it now as animism is normative consciousness, that it begins to shift things around, that what we're doing, the dances with trees, the giving praise to the sky, all of that is actually, that's quite real and ordinary and really indigenous to our experience as human animals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I am an avid fan of the Emerald podcast and Josh Fry. Yeah. Yeah, I've been working with him for the last couple of years pretty regularly.
Mm.
I think he's really on the right track, and he's hit a nerve with thousands of people who are now tuning into the podcast, because our bodies are starting to remember that it's not normal to think about our world as some kind of big machine that's dead and just somehow lifeless, that to not see everything around us as alive and full of consciousness and something that we want to learn the language of and speak with and give gratitude and, you know, prayer and all of those things that are so, you know, frowned upon in a mechanized and secularized, you know, society. We're remembering how it's actually not normal to think of things in mechanical terms.
Right.
So many of us are finding our way back. And for me, somatics has been one of those ways to return to what our roots are as humans. I think it's probably 99.999% of the time that humans have been on the planet, which is actually millions of years for humans and our immediate predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
That we were alive in oh my gosh, a riot of other beings everywhere. And the fact that we're kind of like deaf, dumb, and blind to their voices, or the way that their expressions, that our listening skills have atrophied, doesn't mean they're not there. And you know, the people that I work with now are, you can see in real time their faculties actually coming alive, because we're in a pretty precarious position as a species, as I think probably everyone on this call recognizes. That one of my teachers, Daniel Four, says that our ancestors are trying to shake us awake in a burning house. You know, we're kind of been lulled to sleep. You know, maybe the smoke is starting to get to us, and we're falling asleep, and the voices of the animate world are getting louder and louder and louder.
Mm-hmm.
And unless we learn to listen, we will, you know, human beings won't, it doesn't seem like we would be able to survive without learning to listen again.
Absolutely. And yes, I'm thinking is your way of life right now is land based, and I keep coming back to how we perceive land and our collaboration with land to be really important. So for example, how does that translate into everyday activity for people, for example, who are living in urban environments? Or how do we begin to appreciate land and land use, and how can we support through our individual actions, which becomes collective action, to preserving land, to honoring land? And just as a very simple example, I live next door to a 500-acre organic farm here in the Hudson River Valley, and they're a CSA. And for those of you who don't know what CSAs are, they're community supported agriculture. And how that works is people give money up front to the farmer in the spring with this kind of contract that each week in the growing season, I will show up to your farm or you will deliver it to me, a box of whatever produce is kind of happening at that moment. And so this farm, not only, is organic and they're tending to the land, but they're now also part of a new certification I'd never heard of before, a social justice equity certification, which is about that their employees are paid well and all kinds of, I mean, it's phenomenal to see the intersectionality happening just around this farm. And so, of course, we're members here, but they also deliver to New York City for certain drop-off locations. So that, for me, in terms of what they're doing, is they're honoring the land, they're educating people about the land, and bringing forth their harvests for us. And so coming back to land and land base, can you say a bit more about your land and just your relationship to land?
Well, when we arrived on this land, it was, quote, raw land. No one had ever farmed or homesteaded. The native people of this region lived close to the water source, and we're up kind of in the woods. So it's unlikely that anyone ever lived on this exact piece of land before. Mm-hmm. So I think that's pretty unusual these days. Even if you move out to a piece of land, it's usually an old farm, or it's a place where, like Seattle, for example, like it's possible that millions of people lived in that Duwamish area. It's a beautiful, fertile, rich with clams and salmon place. This particular spot where we're on, it's unlikely anyone ever, dwelled here before. I've probably passed through. Mm-hmm. So it's truly been a homesteading, pioneering experience for me, where, I mean, I'm from Queens, so it's not like I grew up in a farming family. I had to learn how to chop wood. I had to learn how to do everything. I didn't get any of those skills from my forebears. Well, I did through my bones. Mm-hmm. The memory that's contained in my flesh and bones is still there. And it's also just, it's kind of natural. And in the old days, it was, everyone pretty much had a hand in building your own dwellings. So that has been my experience, is living totally off the grid. This was all before the internet and cell phones anyway. So it was really quiet back then. A lot of using hand tools to, cut trees and, clear a little space for a garden, and then building my own house. And during all of those things, I had already been studying dance and somatics for years. So I was trying to, when I would saw, I was trying to hold my body in a position where I would see other people like hunching over and, grinding away, because the whole point of sawing is to have a log, or a piece of wood, instead of the point of sawing to breathe. Mm-hmm. Or to dance with the wood. So I was trying to reframe the way that I conceived of labor. And there's a difference etymologically speaking between the word work and the word labor. Mm-hmm. Work the root is erg, E-R-G, which has to do with energy. Work is where you direct your energy. So, you can talk about works, public works, or a work of art. That's like where we put our energy in a public or an artistic project. Labor, on the other hand, has completely different roots, and it's I'm going back in my memory bank here, but I think it's related to the word flap and schlep. You know, it's these words where you're kind of like really limp and kind of dragging yourself along.
Right.
So I was trying to go for the work rather than the labor,
Right.
you know.
And the work of art of our own soma, right? And that by the awareness and the action, bringing a certain sustainability into that action. So it's not just also the in the moment of feeling good using an economy of energy, or what I think of as applied conservation, but also being able to do this over time, which of course is important as we age, that we continue our practice of being alert and alive in our environment. So I love that the whole notion of the saw and the breathing and really the dance of that. And you know, I have just a quirky little quote that I want to add because I knew we'd somehow get into physical labor. This is from the actor Ryan Gosling, and I love this so much when I found this. So he's talking about his physique, and he said, you know, anyone can get those if they work at it. It's just a lot of exercising, and it's really quite pointless. Because you go to a gym and you lift a heavy thing, so a muscle grows, but the only thing the muscle can do is actually lift that heavy thing. After a while, they're like pets because they don't do anything useful, but you have to feed them and take care of them, otherwise they'll go away. I feel a bit goofy having them, to tell you the truth. And I just love that perspective on, you know, very often what we think of as fitness and working out. And it's just, but this is like, this is pointless. You know, I could do this and it'll go away. And that sense of how can our somatic technologies, in a sense, allow us to operate in the physical world with more breath, with more grace, with more ease, and also, of course, how that is going to influence our perspective from sawing to sawing, and the dignity of our movement as human beings.
Yes. Yes, the dignity of building your own home, the dignity of that, of collaborating with a whole group of other humans to bring forth your bread from the earth, the sense of satisfaction and belonging,
Mm-hmm.
of shared sustenance. That's, I don't know how we live without that. We certainly can't live without that for too many generations, as we're seeing with the lack of meaning and the depression, the level of depression and anxiety and confusion that we're seeing now. So much of that, I believe, would be alleviated if we raised our food together. And it's a real, it's both a privilege and a burden. You know, it's a blessing and a burden to be able to just go to the supermarket and get your food.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we had to all raise our food together, you would have to go out onto the land and tend to the soil with your fingers, and you'd have to figure out how to, you know, I've called it the yoga of gardening.
Mm-hmm.
Where how do I bend over in a way that I can repeat, you know, for hours in a day without harming myself? Like we would be figuring that out.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't be something, you know, abstract that we do on a yoga mat. It'd be something you're doing in the garden. Like what is warrior pose for?
Mhm.
What are any of these postures for, other than to keep our body primed to to eat, to eat and to sleep and to love and to dance. So
And in relationships, that to kind of, because of course we all have different circumstances in our lives. We're all in different locations, and if we were to scale that down, and for me this is the individual invitation to everyone, is in taking these ideas, how can you scale down to action that meets the demands of your life, right? So how do we each tap into our own creativity to kind of consider, oh, how can I use my movement practice as a way to meet the demands of the world, and also, in a sense, as you were using the word before, give praise, to notice this environment as I'm walking, even to look up at the sky instead of looking down at my feet or my phone. How can I embrace space in a very different way that continues to feed me, but as an organism moving through life, how does my being also radiate out as well as center within, right? So how do we each become our own living exemplar of the life force? And that was, I know, a nice long digression, but I like to ride the wave at times.
I don't know if that's a rhetorical question, or if you're I don't know that I would have an specific answer for that, because everyone lives in a different context.
Right.
But I do think the modern lifestyle presents a lot of challenge to people being able to at least remember that our bodies are for something.
Right.
They're not only for sitting in front of a computer like this.
Mm-hmm.
This seems to be the only acceptable posture for bodies these days.
Mm-hmm.
It has become like a privilege to do manual labor, to have any manual labor involved in a modern American life. Obviously, I'm not talking about many countries in the world still have plenty of,
Right.
Physical demands on a body, but are these strange, North American and maybe just the hyper modern lifestyle makes it difficult for folks to feel that exchange with the sky and the air. It has to be a very intentional, activity to go outside, to go outside and remember to do those practices. It's not just a matter of course that's woven into the fabric of our lives. So
Mm-hmm. I've been
I
thinking.
had to move out to the country personally to remember, and I know that's really not possible for everyone in modern America or Canada or wherever you're tuning in from.
Right.
But we could get involved with gardens, at least somewhere.
Right.
Where we are.
To cultivate something alive and to follow it through and to have that relationship with the world in that way. I've been thinking lately, as you were talking about, this idea of pilgrimages and pilgrimages to wilderness, pilgrimages as part of our rhythm of just remembering I need a certain amount of time in the woods. So to move from the utilitarian to more of what you're referring to as the praise body, the sensory body, participating with the woods. And you most recently organized a gathering of where you got people out of their lives. I'd call it a different kind of pilgrimage, but a pilgrimage all the same, of creating the time and space to gather with others outside for 5 days. And so if you could just speak a little bit to that, as one of the ways that we do connect around land and community.
Mm. Well, that's definitely pretty fresh in my mind, because I just got back a couple of days ago from spending 5 days, which sounds like a lot of time to our modern minds, to just be out in some cabins in the woods with folks, but it went by in a blink. And I had wished that we had the opportunity to, and maybe we can work towards that, but to spend from November to, say, February, and the dark days of the year, just being together, eating together, dreaming together, dancing together. This was a group of people who are, I call them the tenders, people who are poets and artists and dancers and, therapists, and people who tend to others and were tender-hearted. So the amount of embodied intelligence of the people in that gathering, the people who were there, we had really everything we needed to survive for an entire winter together. We had ancestral skills people, we had storytellers, we had, grief tenders, we had prayerful human beings, we had people who carry songs, and we didn't schedule anything, because it seemed like the most pressing need for everybody there was to just stop, just decompress, and see what bubbled up from there. So I would like to see us gather for several months, actually, to do something like that. It seemed like 5 days wasn't even barely beginning to scratch the surface, but
Right.
I see some people in the chat who were there. My friend Jam was integral in helping to the praise gathering, to create the praise gathering. And I noticed they're saying that asana is all about preparing the body for hours of meditation without pain and injury. And when we were talking about what is asana for, and I did want to talk about this for a minute, because I have also heard the same thing, that asana is for purposes, like the end goal is to be able to sit in meditation. And I believe that teaching is only part of the truth. I think it is that it has come to us from a society that was already falling out of the animist roots. And I believe that asana is to prime our bodies for work in the landscape, for raising food, raising children, all of the things that our bodies need to do, and also for prayer, also for meditation. But the end goal, to be able to sit completely still in lotus, I just don't believe that's the full teaching. I just wanted to say that real quick, Jam, because you wrote that in the chat. And that's what we were doing at the praise gathering, was remembering how our bodies, allowing our bodies to remember how to be in humble, worshipful gratitude postures.
Right. And I think that's, of course, the challenge of the times, which is how do we honor traditions and honor technologies that were made, years and years ago, but with specific, perhaps, ideologies, and how can we draw from those and update them to meet the needs of modern culture and who we are now? Because as a species and on the land, it is changing. And so, how do we, in a sense, learn gratefully the practices, but then find ways that we can innovate them and make them relevant to the here and now and ourselves. So I'm all for that diversity of expression. And it's like you said, I can use practice for this, I can use practice for that. There's a lot that I can use this for. So I'm aware that we are heading into completing the conversation, the formal conversation, where we'll move into more kind of Q&A, but to honor our time constraints. But for this part of our conversation, anything in particular that you want to kind of bring to completion for yourself, any reflection?
Something that comes to mind is the notion of indigeneity. One of the reasons I was always so attracted to somatics, because I had been exploring different modalities in my teens and my 20s, and somatics, because it has a very distinctly European lineage. The forefathers are European. It always felt like part of my bones and blood, and so I moved towards that sense of somatics as an indigenous inheritance that comes. I felt like I could claim that as part of my lineage and my ancestral body. And there's a lot of activism and discussion and thank goodness, rightly so, about who's indigenous and who isn't. And I just wanted to advocate for this notion that all of us, anyone alive, any human being alive on the planet these days, can trace their roots to indigeneity somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us have to do a lot more digging than others, because the process of colonization has been in operation for, say, thousands of years, and has obscured some of the roots of where we come from. But every single one of us is from an animist culture somewhere back there. And we can remember our indigeneity in that way, that it's, if our ancestors were not incredibly wise and loving and related to the earth in ways that were beautiful and sustainable and thriving, if our ancestors weren't fast and lively and adaptable and had incredible memories and abilities to speak to the natural world all around us through our soma, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have those faculties. And I do a lot of ancestral recovery, ancestral healing work with people, where we get in touch with our ancient grandmothers, grandfathers, our kin, who are still ready and willing to speak their wisdom into our ears or into our bodies. We perceive their wisdom through so many different channels, but they're all somatic. Mm-hmm. And all it takes is for us to be open to that. It's not something that is, only some type of highly trained shaman can hear the voices of your ancient grandmothers. No, our ancient grandmothers are getting louder. They really want to speak to us right now. And I'm talking about the ones who were rooted into these indigenous village terrains that that we're discussing here today, that they would like to have a word with us, and they they can and they will. They will have the last word. So but it's a beautiful process of remembering and allowing our bodies to be those receiving channels for this wisdom, so we can actually bring it out into the physical world for change in the so-called Anthropocene.
And along those same lines, I think for me, in a similar way, part of invoking the basics of practice, breath, vocalization, contact, movement, and stillness, for me, those indigenous technologies of the soma, to begin to reconfigure this body of culture, right? The enculturated body. How do we begin to relax into our original birthright of being elements of nature? How do we begin to let go of the mental corsets that inhibit our just becoming the fullness of what we are as animate bodies? And so for me, that the weaving together of our perspectives for me is a real delight and a treat. And before we transition over into conversation, into overtime conversation, I see we have a lot of chat to respond to. We are going to take a 4-minute aesthetic break. So if everybody can turn off your cameras, I am going to put on a video where you can simply just relax into yourself and let all this information just kind of wash over you. Now we're in open forum. So I see that there's a lot of things going on in the chat, but also I'd like to open up to anybody who would just like to unmute and speak up. Any responses, comments, questions, interpretive dances?
Amy and Nala, there's a comment in the chat from someone who says they cannot unmute where they are right now.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like me to read it, or would you like to just read it silently and then respond?
Oh, the one, okay. I can read it, yeah.
It would be great if someone could read it.
Sure, I'm happy to. So Esther Erickson says, I wonder from your experience with working with people in moving through this embodied remembrance and reattunement, do you have anything to share about which practices more specifically seem to help most in this process for unfamiliar people? Practical, functional practices such as gardening or expressive, abstract dialogues with the living world? If I can make such a gross kind of distinction, of course, both the dignity of the reward of doing earthly work and the creativity and imagination possible through expressive arts are both very powerful when experienced on an embodied level. Smiley face. Beautiful, beautiful talk. Thank you so much for facilitating this. Deeply nourishing and heartening.
Thank you, Esther. So, specific practices. I know that when I end up spending time on a screen, so I try and put boundaries around the time when I am on a screen, and definitely not past sundown, because I don't like having the blue light. It messes with my circadian rhythms. But I try and confine my online work into the morning so that I can go out and do some gardening or walk on the beach or do something on the earth, with the earth, in the latter half of the day. It's almost like all the radiation builds up in my system, and then once I touch the earth again, it can dissipate. That's what it seems like. I don't have any proof that that's what's happening, but that's my guess, that it's really helpful. But I'm fond of taking a walk in sitting by a favorite tree or a favorite rock and just laying down on that rock. I'm fond of as I mentioned before, bringing a little something, a flower or a stone or a song, and offering it to the beings of that place. Maybe that's also accompanying some kind of posture of humility. You're asking about things that help these days. I, to be honest, spend a lot of time in prostration. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea what is going on in the world. And so a lot of that is belly down on the ground and hands up and my jaw open, and just completely surrendering to the wisdom of the Mother Gaia or the forest or whatever you conceive that something larger than yourself to be, just really surrendering, emptying myself and being open to what comes. And sometimes I'll hear a phrase, or I'll just have a knowing, or I'll experience some sensations that are new, like a warmth might come through my solar plexus where there was tension. It's like composting some of the frenetic energy or some of the muscular tension, like really allowing that to surrender. That's a practice that is anyone can do, and you can really do that anywhere where there's access to a piece of ground, even if it's a patch of grass in a local park. And you can also do that just on the floor, on a sheepskin on the floor of your home. I mean, that wood is also part, comes from the earth as well. So those are just very basic practices that can be done, and they don't belong to any particular spiritual tradition. You're not appropriating if you put your belly on the ground and you're in a posture of humility. Does that answer your question? I hope it at least starts to answer your question, and maybe Jamie has some ideas as well.
She mentioned that you resonate with your response a lot, and it does. And I'd say, it's interesting that you were talking about, because I was thinking, yes, sometimes just during the day to lie down on the ground, whether it's inside or outside, committing to gravity, letting all of those postural muscles come to rest, making contact with yourself, breathing, humming, whatever feels good, just to re-nourish and remember yourself as part of the earth, as a living organism. And the other just simple practice for me is taking a walk each day. Just the dance of the walk, walking without carrying a bag or this or that or the other, just really walking. And particularly since I walk on land instead of sidewalks, there's that whole buoyant relationship to walking, stimulating my equilibrium responses in a different way. And of course, stopping and just receiving. And for me, that's really important, just the punctuation of movement with stillness. And if I was to go further with that, other times, because you were talking about the expressive and the artistic, that I'll take my camera with me. And that for me is a great practice of focusing attention and actually discovering something of beauty that I can then bring back to the world. And so a lot of my photographs are, as you saw in this last video, are things that I make videos out of and just put them online, or just to keep bringing more and more beauty, because beauty is the tonic for the soul. Our souls need beauty, and the world offers itself to us so freely if we pause, pay attention, move with it, sing with it, whatever arises as our way in to that connectivity. But I find for myself the focusing with a lens and that practice, and then when I feel like, okay, that creation has met me, now I can just open up my awareness again. So it's just a focusing and a wandering that continues to inspire me and connect me to place. Minu wants to say, I would love to ask the question whether life force and other bodies outside of us can be felt in different nuances depending upon the other body, human, animal, plant. The largeness of these bodies or the finesse of them or the fineness of them, and whether there's a language or other writers, scientists you know who have given this a name or description. A visceral empathy, for example, or the sense for life force, aka Rudolf Steiner.
I would listen to the Emerald podcast. That is a huge resource. And at the end of each episode, and each one is an absolute work of art. He includes a bibliography of just incredible amounts of rabbit holes that you could explore. But I mean, is there a name for it? Resonance?
So I'll just type that here. So Emerald podcast. Yeah, I've just recently discovered him. But I really so taken by his mantra. Animism is normative consciousness. Yes, like it's indeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people can feel free to add. I see folks are adding geographies of ecosomatic essays. Yeah, there's lots of
I was going to unmute and ask, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a mother of a wonderful 26-year-old organizer who's also quite a dancer, American Studies major at Wesleyan and dance in Middletown, and has been very connected with the earth, and is for years growing up in the redwoods, born in the redwoods in the water, and yet being thrust into this world, like your just description of your going prostrate, is a lot for them, singular, a lot. And they're really doing active work and organizing. And I was so grateful to have you come on the Ismeta and to come on this and to be here. But I'm thinking about the healing work that you could do. I mean, my child has the tools of dance and movement and earth, but many do not. And so the work that you're doing in particular for these young, dedicated organizers with what we are experiencing in our world right now, and the people, especially like my child, who's so in tune with the ancestral voices already. I just want to, my question is really, I mean, I could call you and send you, and I will connect you, but what about others? What about others, other young beings like this that are in such a place that you just described so aptly as you go to the ground? Thank you.
Yeah. My prayer and my wish for the world is that we have a very huge and massive decentralization of these tools and technologies that can reach all who need them. Doing grief work in our communities on a weekly basis, to have a dedicated space for a grief ritual, which means for joy ritual, because grief and praise sleep in the same bed. They go hand in hand, and expressing our the despair and the shock, the rage, the surprise, the sadness, the fright of these times in the ways, the old ways, with our voices, with our bodies, with our drums. To do those things together on a massive scale would be my prayer. So that's what I'm trying to do, is get the tools to the people, to your son and to all of their friends. And it's going to take all of us for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to dovetail that for a moment of just the retreat I had at Sea Ranch in September. I remember one of the women in the group saying, everybody in our group is, like over the age of 40. Where are the young people? And I realized in conversing with her, it's like, well, there are ways to get our work out in the world. At the same time, this retreat is to, as you beautifully used that expression before, is to tend to the tenderers, to those who are holding space, that it's important that our own self-care and our ability to go on retreat for ourselves and renew with the environment and our own somas and community is so important then for moving back out in the world and reaching people. So I sometimes see that how our work manifests can be supporting behind the scenes, supporting in front of the scene, wherever we are. And just as, once again, because I always like to come down to what are simple actions people can do. So periodically I've done what I call fundraisers, which is to target like a group that I want to support with money, and call together a group of fellow performing artists to kind of just put on an event together where we all donate our time, and then all the proceeds go to that group. So our last one that I did in 2019 for my 65th birthday was for the Sunrise Movement, which of course is young climate activists. And I remember that they were grateful for the money, but beyond that a group of older people would like say, we have your backs. We are here to support you. You are doing important work. And that validation alone, as well as the material support, was really inspiring to the organizers. So there's many ways to support our young people, to support activist communities, even if we ourselves are not on the front lines, right? So
Thank you.
keep supporting all beings.
Mhm.
Please.
Just offer something.
Yes.
Yeah, hello. It's lovely to be here. Maybe also like costumes like this one. Can you see that? That came to me from my somatic felt sense. Like a vision. This same what we might call embodied relational presence is what myself and other friends are calling it. Has this capacity, doesn't it, for visions to come, and so these visions, these costumes are an amazing way to connect with people, I notice. And just even wearing the costume and moving, just a little bit like a different species has an incredible way to connect to other species and how they might be experiencing the world. So, in case that's helpful.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, we made 9 of those. This was part of sort of Extinction Rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
And the great big bird heads made out of willow and tissue paper and stuff. So in case that's helpful. Yeah.
Gorgeous.
I'm not seeing any of them for some reason. Oh,
You see it?
I see you now, but the bird came and went. Okay.
Sure, sure. There we go.
Could you just speak to, while you're still online, your sense of how ecosomatics can dovetail with Extinction Rebellion, what you're doing, that outer expression of bringing embodied action into
Yeah.
the...
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. Well, to be honest, even within a movement like Extinction Rebellion, it's still incredibly niche, what I'm talking about here, which surprises me. But yeah, as I say, we made 9 of these costumes. There were like a lot of people involved, these big bird heads as well. And so being within a massive demonstration actually of, many thousand people dressed in these costumes, to me it really signals this alliance of the human and non-human world, and it's been, I don't know, to me the costume kind of wants to be worn itself. Do you know what I mean? It's got its own life now, and so this costume has come out at various festivals I've been at. Yeah. And it's just this amazing ability of costumes to bridge a gap between the so-called activist and the so-called, audience, punter, general public, whatever we even mean by any of those things. It just have this lovely capacity for people to come and say, what is that bird or something? Do you know what I mean? It's a brilliant bridge. And then, as I say, I would often say, do a shout out. Anybody want to dress as a bird, and like so many people want to fly, hey? So you'd have a lot of people wearing these costumes that I'd never even met before. It's an amazing way to meet. And then to just, to invite that thing of, and what is the vision you see? So always like with this open hand of, and how is it for you? Do you know what I mean? Just always over and over. This isn't just for a few special people. That's not my interest, And so that sort of lovely capacity to reach out and say, how do you experience the world? What are the animals that come to you? What's the closeness for you of the, these alliances? So many things that I could never have dreamt of, do you know what I mean, before it? It was just like, make the costume.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. It's nice of you.
It's brilliant. And thank you for your service. And I love how you ended to say, it just started with making a costume, and then who knew what would come out of it? And I think for me, that's really fundamental to all these conversations. Taking that first step, something that gives us joy, that gives us meaning, that gives us purpose, whatever is speaking to us, to start and see what unfolds. And so I love your image of the open hand.
Well, in embodied presence, isn't this what it's saying all the time to us? Just one step is all we're given, because we don't know, we cannot know what's going to come until we actually do it. That's what's really come across to me. No.
Thank you so much.
Such a good example of emergence right here, the intelligence of the people gathered here. I mean, some of the questions are coming towards me, but it's probably any one of you could have answered any of these questions, and it would have been brilliant. So thank you all for doing the work that you're doing in the world. I know everyone here is like-minded and probably has communities of practice that overlap, and appreciate everyone's service in the world and for being here today. Important work.
Anything else before we close today? There's a lot of messages I need to read later. I need to catch up with my chat later.
I did also want to invite folks to get in touch with me. I'm a person. I'm real, you know. You can reach out to me. I do lots of work with people one-on-one and in groups, and I invite you to, yeah, get in touch if that's something that appeals to you. I can put my various websites in the chat here, bewellnow.org, and also Well Wisdom. Yeah. So good to have this conversation together today. It looks like we're coming to the end of our time, and I this could go on all day for me. We could just keep on chatting. But I've appreciated this conversation.
Yes, speaking of continuing on, I just wanted to let everyone know that Jamie's third episode of the Earth Matters podcast will occur on December 21st on winter solstice. Same time. I'll put the registration link for this community gathering in the chat. Deep gratitude to both of you.
So let's take a moment to enjoy our breath before we say goodbye to each other, to drink in the richness of this field. May we all remember that we each matter. We are matter. The earth matters. May we move forward with grace and purpose, fullness of being, and much breath to carry us forward. Thank you for coming.